Hey guys, welcome for another video. You are watching.
Hello everyone, welcome back. In our previous video, we learned about injection and how injection can create a lot of attack surface for on MCP for attackers, right? And we did see some of the important items that we need to keep in mind while we develop the MCP server or whenever we auditing the MCP server to ensure our MCP servers will not be vulnerable for injection attacks. In this video, let's try to understand some of the access controls. So what is access controls and where we can have this access control configured. So we can have access control configured on the MCP server level because as a tools we have to send back to the client that whatever the MCP server is capable of running, right? So but at the MCP server level we should have a proper defined access control mechanism to ensure what user is triggering what tool and what action is trying to make based on the tool is invoking, right? So because we can't let all users to do every operations on a server. We should define some of read operations restricted for only few people, and write operations are only for a few people, and full control over the MCP server or new toolings, or do anything you want with the tools that have been configured on a certain user. It's not like every user should have a capability to perform anything you want, right? Like, and it depends upon the business use case obviously, but there should be a proper defined access control on a MCP server to have to ensure that data will not be there for unauthorized people. So some of the vulnerabilities that can happen because of weak access control configured on MCP level are path traversal, SSRF attack, IDOR, and privilege escalations. And even as part of the components which would fall under access controls with configurations or MCP server level. On MCP server level, how you invoke the tool, and if that MCP server is expecting some of the parameters as parts from the MCP client, manipulation of that MCP parameters, and there is no validation on those MCP uh, parameters passed as JSON RPC on a server level. So these are the some of the common issues that can lead to access control vulnerability. So let's see some of the types of access control vulnerabilities that we can look. The first one is part travel exploitation. So let's take you have a scenario where you have an internal deployed MCP server where you want to let all your company employees to access the shared folders or some of the documents that belongs to respective team directly utilizing the MCP client instead of going through your drive or searching for each folder, something like that, right? So here whenever you give this kind of access, you have to define a proper access control based on the role. For an example, I'm the software engineer, so I should be having the access to the folder which has the data related to the engineering team only. If at all, if I can able to access the folders of the financial team and accounting team and HR team, that is a kind of breach because I'm able to see other people's salary, other people. Like hiring process, what's the different salary for different people, and a lot of other things, right? So they should be proper access control on MCP server when the user request is made and what kind of file is trying to make. So for an example here, if at all, if there is a user trying to make a call for etc password, we should have some of the mechanism to identify these are sensitive files, and someone is trying to do a path traversal and able to or get the file data for his client, something like that. And so we should have some of the control checks on sensitive files, or we should have some of the auditing or the alerting capability to identify these kind of calls from a client to server. So how does the vulnerability or vulnerable MCP tool with respect to Traversal looks like is full path is app slash document. It was supposed to read that direct file without checks, open the full path. If you give something like dot dot slash slash dot dot slash slash, it will take two directory behind that, and it doesn't even validate which file you're trying to read. So so to make it much more secure, we should have a proper validation, and we have to fix the path irrespective. If at all, if there is any kind of dot dot slash slash something like that, we should revoke that, uh, and we should ensure the base path is this whatever it happens. And in the same way, there should be a base path defined for engineering, finance, or shared folder for each department base, right? And ensure based on the user role or user department he belongs to, he should be able to make a call with the respective shared folder. We should have a such access control defined at the MCP server level. And SSRF, same way, like where attacker can able to make some query to AWS IAM credentials. We should have some of the controls on the server side, where user will should not be allowed to make any kind of curl request or duplicate request to make call to different server. It can lead to issues where user can perform prompt poisoning and make the server to call for a metadata and steal the AWS credential. So here also we should have a controls on what user can execute what binaries on a server level, right? We should keep that kind of controls strictly whenever we dealing with some of the executions directly on the server level. Insecure IDOR, I mean like IDOR vulnerabilities. Uh, this is MCP gonna make IDORs to go in a while, because let's assume you identified the IDOR on XYZ endpoint, and obviously you have to replay the attack to show the possible PI exfiltration from a number of users. So using the MCP, you need not to do that. If you identify that endpoint, and if the endpoint is made as a MCP tool, you can ask the tool by giving like, hey, here are the user IDs from 5000 to 5600. Can you please pull the details of this user and order in the tabular format, group by the PII? And within 2 or 3 minutes, the MCP server will call the parallel calls to that API and fetch all the information and store it in a better way, right? So MCP gonna make the IDORs or nightmare. But yeah, like in terms of access control, whenever you make a request to the MCP server backend, if at all, if that user is trying to call the session information or some of the details with respect to the user, ensure the user ID is binded with the session properly and validated against it. If there is a mismatch between the session called and user ID requested, then we should throw some of the error, right? So if it is own data, you have to trigger. If it is trying to call some other information, then we should flag it. That's one of the strongest mechanism that we can implement to detect or identify access control on a MCP server level. I have one small example. Let me share you that screen. So we have a tool called Session Sync. So what happens? There are websites where or applications like where you will be part of multiple team, and you will be having a multiple roles, and you can exchange your session between the multiple roles, and you can log into that particular team and do the actions based on the particular team itself, right? In these scenarios, we can come up with the attack something like you are part of one team as a reader, and but you are a part of other team as a part of something like collaborator, right? So let's tell sync the session team lead with the developer for a project collaboration. So this should call the session sync, and it should sync the whatever the role you have as part of that project, and it should sync the your role uh, correctly. Now, what if there is no proper validation, not proper validation on the backend and able to sync the sync the user binded to the role which you are not even part of, or a team which you are not even part of. Here, if you see the tool or the authorization attached to this MCP server has no role in that project collaboration. So I'm trying to sync myself as a team lead for this collaboration project. That is why like actual sync happened, and it was able to fetch the flag called flag session sync data lake, right? What happened here, in a sense, even though I do not have access to a collaboration, but there is a project called collaboration exists, and a team exists, and there is a role called team lead in that particular project, and I know these are exist. So that is where I asked the server to, can you sync my session with particular data, I mean like particular team, right? So that is where the exploit triggered, and team session established, and we were able to capture the flag. Let me go back to my actual data screen. Okay, privilege escalation. Yeah, we should have a defined control matrix on the each user. For example, guest can only read data which are open for internet. User should only read its own read data and write data. Admin can do all the operations. Here, if at all, if a user is able to identify some broken access control, and he can assume or make himself as a victim or an attacker, and he can make a call to all the operations as part of the application, even though he is not have the permissions to do. And this is happen can happen because of weak access control enforced. So how we can have the defense in depth for when we're dealing with access control? One is obviously at the layer one, and we should have a input validation, schema enforcement, and rate limiting. Rate limiting is very important because if at all, if there is any kind of IDOR, so rate limiting can pull, I mean like narrow down the impact if you have a enforced strict validation, restrict attackers by calling so many API calls to pull the sensitive information. And as an authentication part, we should verify the identity token and session, and even as part of authorization, we should enforce the RBAC and validate the user made a request against the session he belongs to, and there should be a proper resource ownership defined, as we discussed with example of file system, right? So we should have a proper resource ownership validation on that. And we should have some of the runtime monitoring. If at all, if an employee belongs to engineering trying to make a call to HR related documents or finance related document, they should be a monitoring system on such calls and identify them and trigger the alerts to the security team. So yeah, we should have like the same thing is in a code based way, how you can have the proper validation that can you done, that can be implemented. And defense principles, something like you should have a least privilege and multiple validations layer and fail secure defaults. And authentication and session security, we already discussed it. We should validate against a session binded to the user IP, and we should have a periodic expiration of the session and rotation expires the session if user is not active for xyz minutes, and ensure in authentication level you have MFA and RBAC defined, right? So these are some of the context about the access control and how we can define access control. What are the possible vulnerabilities that can happen if we do not have imposed the strong validation on the access control on MCP server level. All right, this is about the this section. Let's see you guys in the next section where we can discuss about the authentication and authorization in MCP.